Spanning the globe, it's World Affairs Roundup.
The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents World Affairs Roundup, a monthly edition of International Focus, providing opinion and analysis of global events, with John Katzka, a retired member of the U.S. Foreign Service, Ann Hamilton, political scientist at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service, and Robert Kraig, executive director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin and author of articles and books on American foreign policy. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now, here's your moderator, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus and another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. Our prescient panel of Roundup regulars has assembled once again to look at Bye-bye Baghdad. President Obama's reiteration of a date-certain withdrawal from Iraq has prompted a proliferation of punditry on the nearly decade-long conflict. What will be the legacy of this war of choice, and how is its endgame impacting the 2012 presidential race? Athenian democracy. The Greek government rocked the Eurozone with plans to hold a referendum on what was thought to be a done deal on its debt crisis fix. What's behind this latest chapter in the ongoing Greek tragedy? Geeks versus drug lords. An amorphous collection of computer hackers known simply as Anonymous have thrown down the gauntlet against one of Mexico's deadliest drug cartels. Do they have the bandwidth for a fight? Unfinished business. As the autumn chill of the military government's unhurried approach to democracy hits Egypt's Arab Spring, we'll examine a revolution yet to be realized. Well, welcome back, our panel, one of 7 billion people as of this week. John, I'd like to start with you and Iraq. Was this a surprise that we suddenly have a date for withdrawal?
It's something we knew was coming, as something we were trying to avoid. I supported initially our going into Iraq. But as soon as we discovered that there were not the weapons of mass destruction, and we began to think in terms of creating in Iraq a little America with democracy and market economics, I quickly soured on the idea. Our ability to be able to project our ideals has been wanting for some time, and unfortunately we keep running into this kind of issue. I was thinking about Vietnam and how after a number of years what we thought was a quagmire and was going to be a particularly sore spot has turned around a bit in terms of our expectations, thinking towards your question about where are we going on this thing. But I think Iraq is much more complicated than Vietnam because of the major players in the region. China was not interested in trying to take advantage of what happened in Vietnam. Russia gained some military bases for a period of time, but they weren't of significance. So,
and what about the process that led to this date being sort of set in stone? I mean, this was not something that was a recent phenomenon, was it?
No, actually, it dates to the end of the Bush administration and the Strategic Armed Forces Agreement, where by that agreement we agreed to leave by the end of this year. And there was an attempt to renegotiate to try and leave some troops, with the Obama administration finally offering 5,000, despite Leon Panetta's and Mike Mullen's recommendation that we leave at least 10,000. But then the agreement broke down in negotiations with the Iraqis over whether or not the Iraqis would grant immunity to U.S. troops if they engaged in any acts that that could lead to trials in Iraq. So it broke down there. But by leaving, we are respecting the original terms of the agreement.
Well, and Robert, the response from the Republican aspirants to the White House were predictable. Let me share a few of them with you. Mitt Romney said it was naked political calculation or sheer ineptitude. Lindsey Graham said the decision will, quote, come back to haunt our country and Michelle Bachmann said it demonstrates how far our foreign policy leadership has fallen. So did Obama lose Iraq?
Well, it does remind me of the whole losing China debate. It has as much intellectual credibility. I mean, look, this was a timetable negotiated by the Bush administration. And there's no reason for us to stay right now, quite frankly. In fact, we're a lightning rod. We actually give Iraq and other actors more legitimacy by being there. We become the target. And so, it's terrible the way we have this situation, still like the Cold War, where conservatives want to go further right than Genghis Khan in order to show how much tougher they would be, but then take a position that I don't even think most Republican primary voters would agree with. That is that we should stay in Iraq permanently, continue to have 50,000 troops. At a time when we're thinking about slashing Social Security, Medicare, other things we can't afford them, we cannot afford this war either, and it was an optional war that, as John said, didn't have a legitimate basis in the first place and has caused a tremendous amount of death and suffering.
Well, John, what about that? Are we out when the last soldier leaves? Does he turn the lights out and there are no more Americans in Iraq?
Well, that never happens because there always is attached to the American embassy, which has grown significantly, either a military aid unit or the defense attaché unit that can be enhanced to be able to deal with some of those concerns. But let me pick up on something Robert said about we are a lightning rod. Right now, it is the Shia versus the United States. And right now, they're not going into differentiating between the United States, between Iraq and Persia. But once we're gone, the Shia are going to begin to look at this thing, and it may allow some distance to grow between Iraqi Shia and the Persian Shia.
So who are the winners and losers then in this situation, Ann?
Well, I think that we don't really have any choice but to leave. I mean, nobody in this debate, as far as I can tell, has really articulated why it's a good idea to stay, why it would be in why it would be in the U.S. interest, what we hope to gain by staying. And after 9 years, more than 4,000 American lives, more than 1 million Iraqi lives, $700 billion. It's time to go because we haven't accomplished, we haven't known why we were there in the first place. So I don't think staying any longer will do that. As far as winners and losers, I believe that this is a good decision to, it's a decision that had already been made, but I don't think it's going to play it's not going to be an issue in the presidential election. They're posturing right now, but I can't imagine that it will end up being an issue.
I agree.
So, Robert, I'll give you the last word on Iraq. President Obama said troops can leave with their heads held high. What did we accomplish in Iraq?
I don't think we accomplished much. It's not the fault of the troops, and obviously they, served, in the interest of the country and risked their lives. But unfortunately, like Vietnam, I like John's analogy, it wasn't a war that was necessary at all. It was really, there were no weapons of mass destruction. It was not connected to the 9/11 attacks at all, and it's cost a huge number of Iraqi lives. I mean, it's up to 1 million lives, a lot of American lives, a lot of NATO lives, and so unfortunately, and it wasted national treasure and put us in a much more difficult fiscal situation where we're actually cutting back on vital programs that we need for economic prosperity. So it's been a disaster, but it's certainly the troops should leave holding their heads high. It's their leaders, the people who started this war, who should hold their heads down in shame.
Well, segueing to another situation involving fiscal challenges, our friends in Greece are continuing to roil the waters of the Eurozone. The story is actually quite fluid, even as we as we speak. But there was originally plans to actually vote on what was thought to be a done deal on the bailout package. And John, what do we make of that? I mean, is this a pushback against sort of a domineering by the European Central Bank? Is this the plucky Greek people asserting their sovereignty?
Well, remember, those plucky Greek people were enjoying the benefits of all that money flowing in for a number of years. So put that into perspective. But looking at it from their point of view, when you start to talk about a 1/3 drop in the standard of living, when you talk about another 100,000 government jobs that have to be cut, when you talk about unemployment likely to exceed 20%, beyond beyond what's going on right now, and a 10% reduction in credit available, and nationalization of the banks, and a recession until 2013, this is a very tough kind of picture for the Greeks to be taking on, and you can understand the resistance. Although there was resistance right at the beginning, when the first word came down, that when the word austerity was being mentioned.
But, Anne, is this part of a bigger phenomenon where the perception is basically Germany and France are calling the tunes and dictating to some of the other countries in Europe? Do you think we're going to see more of this sort of national pushback?
From other countries besides Greece? Well, clearly if Greece falls, I mean, if they don't accept this, and even if they do and it doesn't work, which is a strong possibility, we still, you know, there are other countries waiting in the wings to collapse.
As they're called.
Yes, they're waiting to collapse. And they're highly in debt, and even losing the 50%, the write-off of the Greek debt that European and U.S. banks are having to accept is going to put them at greater risk. So this is just the beginning. This won't solve the problem, and I think that we will see pushback by people in other countries when it affects them.
And Robert, what about this idea of, as John is pointing out, the really impact of these austerity programs and the sense that there wasn't any consultation or buy-in by the people? Is this maybe a bridge too far, but is there any connection with some of the Occupy Wall Street movements in this country?
Well, it's a real challenge for democracy when you have, terms being dictated by bankers and by other countries, right? And the people, I agree, they benefited, but for a short term, but they also didn't make this decision. The banks decided to lend all this money and allow this sovereign debt to be loaded up. Now they don't want to lose their investment, so to speak, right? So it is like the Occupy Wall Street in the sense that you have an idea that people beyond you are making decisions that impact your life, and that in this austerity is a problem, not only because it harms people's standard of living, it actually undermines the conditions for growth. And so the whole idea of growing yourself out of the problem is undermined by this approach to austerity, which is, inflicted Latin America, the entire third world. And so we know the Eurozone is a house of cards. Some people consider the Greek referendum, the on-again, off-again Greek referendum, to be something like the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, causing World War I as far as the international system. So you have a very fragile system in which finance capital holds far too many of the cards.
Well, we'll have to leave it at there before our break. When we come back, we'll be a little closer to home in our part of the world. We'll see you shortly after a short break.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to World Affairs Roundup. Well, as promised, we're going to be a little closer to home now, and an interesting story from Mexico, which we're calling Geeks versus Drug Lords. And tell us a little bit about the background of the situation with Los Zetas and Anonymous.
Well, Los Zetas is a drug cartel, one of many that are operating. The country is roughly cut up into about 7 zones, some of which are disputed between cartels. And Los Zetas has grown over the years, become very, very powerful, and engaged in horrendous violence against people, beheadings, hanging bodies on bridges and all. And there's an organization now which is somewhat like WikiLeaks, that is threatening. It's called Anonymous. It's a internet-based site operation that's threatening to expose all the people who have helped this cartel in its work, the taxi drivers who are involved. And I'm quite sure that it's not just taxi drivers. They're threatening to expose a huge web of complicity
in fact,
with the drug lords.
The former prosecutor of the state of Tabasco has a website which was hacked, and we can take a quick look at what Anonymous did to his website. Gustavo Rosario es Zeta, he's Zeta, and just when he thought it was fixed, they added a Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead themed hack as well. So clearly, you know, there are some big names involved. But Robert, what does this say? That this becomes perhaps the most effective weapon against these cartels? And
well, it's interesting. Two different extra-governmental organizations, right? Drug gangs and internet hackers come together.
Now, these haven't always been wonderful people. They've done some nasty things too, Anonymous has.
Such as?
They went after the credit card companies. They went after Facebook. I forget what the issue was with Facebook, but they've done a variety of things. To call this an organization, I think, is giving much too much credence to that.
And I know
it's an association of people with similar ideas at some times.
And we need to protect the credit card companies, John. I know that's absolutely right, but no.
It's because it had all to do with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks too. So.
Well, what's wrong with that? Where was goodness on that side?
Well, it plays out like a Hollywood movie potentially. I can see an action picture here because they were trying to back off potentially because, well, the drug lords are pretty dangerous and might actually kill all the people that are many of them that are labeled as such, and there might be retaliation. So
there is retaliation already on the table. They have taken a young anonymous hacker, and Anonymous has given the cartel until November 5 to release him, or they're going to begin releasing. One other thing about the associates that they're talking about, some of these people are very guilty, but some of them are coerced into doing this, and so.
Well, and that brings up the question. I mean, is this a responsible thing to do? I mean, given what's likely to follow if they were to follow through and name names, is this?
I don't know. It depends whether they vet. How would they vet these names? You're right. There is an important question as to whether or not this is a responsible thing.
Right. If they label people based on rumor, even if you believe that people who are actually guilty should be exposed, if they do it based on rumors and false information, then innocent people are actually targeted. So it's very dicey.
The idea that they're going after a cartel is a good thing. The way in which they're going about it is problematic.
I think we have to put it in the context. I know it's two non-governmental organizations, but it should be put in the context of Felipe Calderón's war against drugs, in which 40,000 people have died over the last 4 or 5 years, and the fact that a presidential election is going to occur next year, and they're gearing up for it. And so there's a lot of the PRI, which was in power for 70 years, is they think it will come back into power. So there's a lot of undercurrents of this political struggle that's going on in this story as well.
Well, it's interesting, as we've mentioned, some of the other places where Anonymous, whatever you want to call it, this collection of hacktivists, as they like to call themselves, have been active. What does this say for the future going forward of this sort of digital activism? Is this a force we're going to have to deal with in most situations?
I think we're seeing it in the Arab Spring. We're seeing it in the Occupy Wall Street. Is social media being used as organizing tools for people in a particular area or almost anywhere? Because almost anywhere is local now. Either people can send money, or they can send ideas, or they can come physically to be able to participate in these sorts of things.
And it's not just an organizing tool, they're weapons in a way. I mean, in the sense that you can build and destroy images through this hacking.
Yeah, I mean, social media is an extremely powerful form of communication, and any powerful communication can be used as a weapon. Right. So I think Anne's right, but it creates. There's no mediation. You see, we used to have to go through mainstream media, telegraphs, etc. Right, so right. Now it can happen entirely with different groups of people who aren't anywhere near each other, all coming together in this way in common cause, and then coming up with something like targeting a Mexican drug cartel, which is an amazing thing. But that wasn't done by anyone in a room, people who knew each other in a neighborhood or in a community. They all hooked up with each other digitally in the first place.
Well, another example where social media played a large role is in the Arab Spring generally and Egypt in particular. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the state of that revolution. Robert, maybe you could brief us on who's in charge in Egypt right now and how that transition is going.
Well, unfortunately, democracy is not in charge at this point. The military is in charge. And it was supposed to be a very quick transition, 6 months, and it is
6 months from
February, right? And so it passed, in other words, and now they're talking about 18 months from now potentially. There's a lot of oppression. In addition, there are serious signs of like investigating NGOs that are receiving any foreign money to promote democracy. So a lot of repressive measures, even signs that the general will run for president. He's been seen in civilian garb, which concern people a great deal. So it's definitely gone very quickly from an Arab Spring to an Arab winter. We hope it is hope we can, but at this point it's disturbing how weak at this point the forces of democracy and liberation seem to be right now with full military control. But so it's a very disconcerting situation right now.
Well, you know, John, is that one of the inherent weaknesses across a lot of these movements in the Arab world, where there really wasn't a coherent opposition in the traditional sense to assume
Correct.
power once the old regime is gone?
What we're forgetting here is that the generals allowed Mubarak to fall because he committed the sin of trying to ignore them in the process of succession and appointing his son or ordaining his son to be his successor. So the generals stood aside to let him go away. That didn't mean they were going to go away. The other part of this that we keep forgetting is that there was a 20% increase in foodstuffs that really fueled much of this dissent and still continues. In fact, stories keep coming in about the difficulty of making ends meet, whether Mubarak is there or not. So I think we run the risk of, again, fooling ourselves as to what's going on in other parts of the world by projecting our values and our definitions of what democracy is, what human rights are, and saying these are universal. They're not universal. When you get out into the rest of the world, other people have other ideas of what these terms mean.
Well, and what are some of the sort of influences and vying centers of power within Egyptian society right now, Anne?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, in the elections that are coming up, there are parliamentary elections coming up starting in November 28th, and there are something like more than 550 parties and more than 6,000 candidates. I think those are the figures vying for around between 400 and 500 seats. I don't remember them exactly. So, but of course, so that then favors any kind of political organization that has been in place for some time, which, you know, people keep talking about. This will favor the Muslim Brotherhood, even though the Muslim Brotherhood did not participate early on in the Egyptian revolution.
Because they're better organized than the others.
Right. So yes, that's why it would favor them. And you can clearly see that the country is really divided between groups that favor a democratic solution that could involve the Islamists taking over, various stripes actually, and then those who favor the military taking power. But there's just a lot of confusion over it hasn't consolidated. There's no sort of consolidation that's gone on yet. It's very
Robert,
fluid.
what about Washington's take on this? Has the administration come down on stability versus democracy?
They really don't feel they can have much influence over this at this point directly.
But is there any sort of implied preference?
It's a good question. You've stumped me on that one. So the diplomacy's been too subtle for me to follow on that.
Well, we'll go to one of our resident diplomats here.
I mean, this is where we're caught between our ideals and our national interests. Democracy, if it is successful there, is less likely to support the kinds of goals we have in the Middle East. So we push it on one side, and on the other side, we're trying to negotiate, and Egypt was a very reliable partner in trying to resolve some of the issues in the area. We're in danger of losing that. So we may feel good about it, but it may not help us in our interests.
I mean, I'll tell you what I think. I mean, I know John said that our ideals aren't universal. I think they're relatively universal. That is to say that they are applicable.
It depends upon your relatives or mine.
No, I just mean that there are fundamental principles of freedom that apply. They have to be adapted to specific cultures and regions, and there are people in Egypt who, part of this rebellion, who very much wanted to adopt more liberal democratic principles.
Well, Robert, you have successfully maneuvered yourself into having the last word once again. To our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus and our World Affairs Roundup.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,